So as we found by trying to create our own workflow, and interoperating between APIs often requires manual effort for standardizing these formats. So we'd have to make each of these requests and then get a response, and we'd have to kind of prettify and extract the parts of the response that would be needed to pass as input to the next part of the pipeline. And this requires a lot of manual effort. And we found that when we found that there's an easier way to do this. And so the Playbook workflow builder works by standardizing this input and output types. And so the semantically described components would link their input and outputs to other meta nodes. And we can use this to define APIs or make visualizations. And so the platform was created by Daniel Clark in the lab. And so what this does is that we have basically standardized the input and output formats in our code. So we're able to run our workflow one after the other pretty easily in a streamlined format. So by going to the Playbook workflow builder, workflow builder website, after obtaining our up and down genes, we can start our workflow in the Playbook by with our gene set. So this can be either the up or down gene set. In the example I put here, I used the down gene set. And so after this, we can then construct our workflow by going through each of the steps one after the other. And then so for example, now we start from our gene set input, then we can go to performing the enrichment analysis. After this, we can then extract enrich KEGG pathways. In our example that we showed earlier in the code, we use a reactome. So we can also do that here. After this, we can then go through from our gene set, we can then from our gene set, we can then go and find similar signatures using the sitcom-links gene set search. Doing this workflow then would create an auto-generated summary of what was done in this workflow from the beginning to the end with relevant citations. We're also able to get their report mode, which shows all the steps in the analysis, and we're also able to go back to each of these nodes in our workflow to change in our input or to recompute it. The entire workflow can be exported by clicking on the export button, which we find over here. This would export the workflow into a JSON that can be used by the Playbook Builder API to perform the workflow programmatically via one endpoint, with the endpoint being the Playbook API endpoint. So here we see that after we export this workflow, this is the JSON file that we get. So it's broken down by this is our input. So here we have the type, and its input is a set of genes. We then see what the value is, and our initial value was, for example, this is a gene set with 2 genes here, and then and that is what would be contained in our example GSC down gene set. Each of these workflows would then have an ID and type and data, and so the ID would be the ID of that meta node and its type, and the data would be the data that we get as input into that node. And so, for example, here for the first one we have is the input gene set. We then go to the enricher gene set search, which would take in the ID of the ID or output of the initial node as its input. And that's how we go down again. So to extract the KEGG 2021 human, we take this ID, that would be the input into the extract enricher gene set search node here. And so we can then use that JSON in order to execute our workflow using an API call. So the endpoint would be the Playbook workflow builder.cloud, and we would then make a data variable that would contain that JSON that we had exported. Using this particular endpoint with our URL plus API/DB/FPL and passing in our data as the inputs to the post request, we're able to get the playbook ID of this entire workflow. And using this ID, we can either view the workflow again in the browser by using the playbook workflow builder endpoint /report with this ID. Or if we would like to see the specific output of each section of the workflow in our code, we would then do API/DB/FPL with the playbook ID that we get from our post request. And then using output/export, we're able to perform an API get request so that we can get the output of each of these steps in the workflow seen in our Python code interface instead of just doing that in the browser. And so these are the key resources of each of the tools and also the applications that were used in this talk. And with that, I would like to thank all the members of the lab and thank you for listening.